Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we explore hot topics and ripped from the headlines crises. Housing shortage, affordable housing. We hear these terms a lot. It's a real problem for many. You're also likely familiar with Habitat for Humanity, an organization synonymous with former President Jimmy Carter. Habitat works in all 50 U.S. states and 70 countries around the world, creating decent places to live. Chris Coleman is the CEO of Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity and former 3-term mayor of St. Paul. He's here for the case file I call Housing for All. 2024 marks the 40th anniversary of the Carter Housing Project that has traveled to 14 different countries, bringing locals, celebs, and elected officials together to spotlight the importance of affordable housing. Chris, it might surprise people that not only low-income folks need and get help from Habitat.
Well, absolutely. Our families are hardworking families, are the frontline workers you'll see. And, if you go to the doctor's office, if you go to the airport, if you ride public transportation, in your kids' schools, these are all families that are working, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, and they need help getting over the home ownership threshold. Housing is so expensive right now, and it just keeps on going up, and incomes are not matching that increase. And so when we work with our families, we make sure that they have a mortgage that's affordable, so no more than 30% of their household income. That allows them to have resources to buy books and food and all the other things that you need for life, transportation. But our families work hard, and we help them achieve the goal and the dream of home ownership.
It's interesting you mentioned the dream because I think about from even a young age, we hear people saying owning a home, it's part of the American dream. What are some of the hurdles to getting that home beyond just the price of the home?
We work with families that dream never seemed obtainable. Most of our families are the first of their families to have ever owned a home, and that's part of the problem. So many of our families are able to buy homes because their parents or their grandparents own a home, and they have equity that they can help assist their child buying a home with down payment or whatever. And so the first thing is we have to overcome that barrier of just going, I could never possibly own a home. Some of our families just have credit issues. It may have been a missed cell phone payment or something like that, but it also may have been because our families are struggling. They might have signed on a loan for a relative that the relative didn't pay, the car payment or something. So that dings their credit, and all of a sudden we got to work with them to restore that credit, get them to a point. They don't have to have perfect credit, but they have to get to a point where they can qualify for our loan and ultimately get into that position where they can own a home, they can have the stability of that home, and they can build the equity that comes with home ownership that allows them to maybe start a business in the future or send their kids to college or help their kids buy a house or their grandkids buy a house. That's an opportunity that's been denied way too many people in this country.
Let's specifically talk about Habitat for Humanity's home ownership program. Here in the Twin Cities, you've designed it for households earning $50,000 to $100,000 a year, and you've gotten rid of the sweat equity requirement for homeowners. What does that mean for people who don't know?
When you go back to the origins of Habitat, it was kind of a pay it forward. We'll help you buy a home, you help others get into a home. There's a long history that ultimately it started as a mixed race community in southern Georgia called Koinonia Farms, where people came together to work together, to farm together, to break bread together, white and black families. And that wasn't really popular in southern Georgia at the time. And after doing this for many, many years, the mission kind of shifted, and they said, well, we're going to go over to Africa and start building homes over there. So they got tithe donations from churches and faith communities across the country, started building houses in Africa. And then somebody said in Collier County and then San Antonio, Texas, Collier County is Naples, Florida. And they said, well, that's great that we're building homes over in Africa, but we have a lot of families right here that could use homes in that pathway to home ownership. That was kind of the origins of Habitat as we know now. Because it was in southern Georgia, they happened to have a business relationship with a peanut farmer named Jimmy Carter, who didn't start Habitat, but Jimmy and Rosalind became the most famous volunteers for Habitat after he was president.
It's a fascinating history because I don't think everyone knows that.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating history, but history doesn't dictate what you have to do forever. And I've been in this role for a little over 6 years. We dissected kind of the who we were working with. We disaggregated our numbers. We always said, well, about 80% of our clients are clients of color. But when we broke it down, we realized that the families that were the historic victims of discrimination in housing, redlining, restrictive covenants, building freeways through black neighborhoods, we weren't serving the foundational black community particularly well. So we broke that further down and said, well, why is that? And one of the barriers we had was our requirement that families volunteer for hundreds and hundreds of hours on the home that they were going to own.
Help to build their own home.
Help build a home. And in concept, that's a wonderful thing. I mean, and really, we want our families to come out and learn the skills to maintain their home and all of those things. But if you're a single mom with 3 kids and you're working full time and you don't really have time off and you don't have an extended family to take care of the kids while you're off volunteering on a house, it didn't work. We were seeing black families as our number one applicant to our program and one of the least likely applicants to actually succeed in getting to home ownership. So we just put a racial equity lens on the work that we're doing. We took a practical lens and said, is this working for the families that we want to serve? And we started changing things. And one of the things that we did get rid of is the mandatory requirement of sweat equity. I think even that term has racist roots in it. So, but that mandatory volunteering hours, and said, we're going to start a program called Volunteer and Learn, treating our families the same way we want to treat our volunteers. We'd love to have you come out when you're able to do that and get to know the volunteers that are building the home, all of those things, get the skills. But realizing that we had to do better if we were really going to advance equity in housing in our community. It's working. It's amazing when you actually put a plan in place and it starts to work. We had 8% of our families that achieved home ownership were foundational black households, those that trace their roots to slavery. That was 2 years ago, and now we're closer to 30% of our families are foundational black households.
It's really amazing when you're intentional about something and the intention matches the numbers and the metrics, and you really put solutions to what's happening on the ground. I mean, what you can do.
This word intentionality is really important because we were really intentional about preventing families from owning homes. Again, restrictive covenants, redlining. If you were able to buy a home as an African-American family in the Rondo neighborhood
of St. Paul, Minnesota.
In St. Paul, Minnesota, we came and built a freeway through your front yard and gave you pennies on the dollar for the house that you had worked so hard to own, and then created this diaspora in the black community. We were very intentional about preventing people from buying houses. We have to be just as intentional about helping them get into that dream of home ownership.
Yeah, I would say in the last decade or so, we've heard so much about the importance of building generational wealth, but also all the restrictive covenants in real estate. And sadly, our home state of Minnesota has had a lot of those. We're trying to work to take away some of the negative effects, and I'm sure in all parts of the United States, they're doing the same. So we understand that home values are going up for pretty much everyone faster than their real income levels. I think it's interesting that Habitat has the True Path mortgage program. How is that different, or do you want it to be a model for other mortgage programs, just no matter whether they're connected with Habitat or not?
At the end of the day, it's about having an affordable mortgage. The definition of affordability when it comes to home ownership is that you're paying no more than 30% of your household income in order to achieve that goal. When we work with our families and the interest rate going up, as we talk about the housing prices going up, interest rates having gone up has had a huge impact on affordability of houses for our families. So we have a below market interest rate. We work with our families to make sure that they qualify for that loan. And the other thing that we do that I think is really unique in Habitat is we don't just say, okay, here's your house, talk to you sometime down the road. We actually stay with our families. We work with them. We check in with them. When the pandemic hit, we wrote letters to every one of our homeowners and say, don't wait if you've lost your job because of a pandemic-related, a COVID-related job loss. Don't wait until you're 6 months behind on your mortgage to contact us. Let us know right away, and we'll work with you. And so not one of our families lost their home as a result of a job loss during the pandemic. We have almost zero defaults on our loans because we stick with our families and say, we know that homeownership is new to you. Homeownership is hard. And if you don't have a lot of resources, if the roof starts to leak or if you have a furnace that goes out, it can be the difference between keeping that home and not keeping that home. So we work with our families, and we're very successful about creating that opportunity to generate a multi-generational wealth.
Chris, I want to ask you a little bit about renting versus owning, because there are a lot of statistics right now showing Gen Z is making the intentional choice not to buy a home, partly because of cost, partly because they want to be just more mobile, being able to easily get up and go, change cities, change states. What can you inform that generation about how important home ownership can be, even if it's for a short duration?
Well, first of all, we believe that housing is a continuum from unsheltered homelessness all the way up to home ownership. We're on the home ownership side of that spectrum. And we believe that every dollar that is spent on affordable housing is a dollar well spent, because we do have a housing crisis in this country. There are too many people that have housing insecurity, and that we're not just talking about people that are on the streets, but we're talking about people that are staying in the basement of a relative's house or that are barely on the margins in terms of the rent that they're paying. So we know we need a strategy that encompasses the entire spectrum. But we also know that if you're 25 years old and you've just gotten out of college and you're starting your career, and you might want to be in Denver for a while, or you might want to go out to Boston, that's great. But if you don't get into home ownership, you're foregoing an opportunity to build wealth that is probably the primary way that Americans have any opportunity. I think if you ask the average person on the street, if they have any wealth at all, it's in their home.
And even build credit, right? When you're young. I mean, build wealth, but also build the bankability of being able to get that credit for future projects, future things in life that you want to do.
It's always important, get a credit card and pay it off.
Right. But even if you can get a mortgage, whatever interest rate is happening at the time, being able to have that, even if it's on a small property, a starter home, just having that and having a record of paying that mortgage probably serves you better than 5 years of paying rent.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the things that we look at too, because we look at our families and say, well, they've made their rent payment every month for the last 5 or 10 years. That's a credit-worthy person, and that isn't always looked at that way. So we take that into consideration as well. In some ways, not owning a home for families or for young people that are starting out, that's a nice luxury if you have that kind of flexibility and you have the resources to be able to move and all those things. But we're working with families. They're not choosing between, living in Minneapolis or Denver or Hawaii or something like that. They're not thinking about having the flexibility to go to Europe when they want to go to Europe. They're just trying to get by. They're trying to have a stable place for their kids to grow up. When you think about during the pandemic, home was everything. It was the classroom. It was your workspace. It was your workout studio. It was, it was whatever. Our families are just saying, we want the same opportunity. My mom grew up in Rondo, which was the poor kind of African-American neighborhood in St. Paul. Her family all rented. But when my dad came back from World War II on the GI Bill, they were able to buy a house. That was an opportunity that was denied for way too many folks. But because my mom and dad were able to buy a house, when I needed a loan to buy my first house, I went to the First National Bank of Mom and said, can I have some help with the down payment? And my mom was able to do that. Why? Because she had a home that she had built equity in.
Decades prior.
Right,
it is. It's that continuing cycle, and it can start anywhere, right? So I brought up Gen Z and maybe even Gen...
I've lost track of the generations.
Yeah, so the millennials are Gen Y. I'm in Gen X. So I think about Gen Z and even Gen Y. As you say, Habitat's requirements aren't that you have to be low income. You could be making $50,000 to $100,000 a year, and you're saying, I want to buy a home. Well, why don't you think about Habitat as a place to go apply, see if you qualify? It's a partner walking with you. So hopefully this conversation on the Crisis Files will give more people an idea that they could actually be in the Habitat family.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, there are Habitat affiliates across the country. I think there are somewhere over 1,000 affiliates. Some of the affiliates build, 1 or 2 houses every year. We got almost 140 families into homes last year.
Here in the Twin Cities?
Just in the Twin Cities. Go to Habitat. On the web, for us, it's tchabitat.org.
Or habitat.org for the national website.
For the national, and begin that journey and see if you qualify. We help with down payment assistance. We layer a whole lot of different resources. There's federal money, state money, there's philanthropic money, down payment assistance, first-time home buyer money. I mean, all these different layers that ultimately fill that gap between what that house costs and what the family can afford.
Right, and I love, too, that there's a lot of education involved. So today, as this episode drops, Garth Brooks country singer Trisha Yearwood. They are in St. Paul, Minnesota with construction duties.
Hammers in hand.
Hammers in hand. And it's part of a week-long celebration, which combines with celebrating the 100th birthday of President Carter on October 1, 2024. So first of all, that's amazing. Happy birthday, President Carter. And so much that he's done really outside of the office of presidency for our country, for our globe. I think it's exciting that this program brings together the Carter Housing Project, all different kinds of people. And sometimes it does help that those celebrities are on the ground because it helps gain visibility. But wishing you luck with all of the projects that you're doing, and just such a great thing. So I really hope, Chris, that more and more people learn about, get involved with Habitat, whether on the volunteer side or applying for homes.
We're super excited. We'll be building 30 houses at one time over on the east side of St. Paul. Garth and Trisha will be out there. They have their own house that they bring their friends and family out to build. So it will be a fun week. It will be a busy week. But at the end of the day, it's about the mission. It's about serving families. It's about helping people achieve home ownership.
Right. And that really is timeless. Find out more at habitat.org or tchabitat.org. Today's Crisis Brief is brought to you by Goff Public. Number 1. There are many parts of the United States where restrictive land covenants prevented people based on race from home ownership and from borrowing money. These have impacted people to present day. Number 2. Habitat for Humanity bridges the gap between what a family can afford and actual housing costs. Number 3. Home ownership can benefit anyone. Step number 1 is imagining you could be a homeowner. Reputation issues can arise quickly and unexpectedly. Prepare and plan before a crisis strikes with Goff Public, an award-winning public relations and public affairs agency. Your best defense is a crisis-ready culture that helps you spot potential issues, act swiftly, and reflects your brand's values while building trust with your audiences. Learn more at goffpublic.com. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Check out our website, thecrisisfiles.com, to catch up on all case files and to share ideas for future ones. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.